I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Now today, we're reading from the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and let's focus on verses 20 through 24. Each person should remain in the life situation in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Well, it should not be a concern to you, but if you can become free, by all means, take the opportunity. For he who is called by the Lord as a slave is a freed man. Likewise, he who is called as a freed man is the Messiah's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brothers, each person should remain with God in whatever situation he was called. Now, the legalized practice of forced slavery in the United States ended with the close of the American Civil War. And for many years leading up to and following the Civil War even, many Southern pastors who were pandering to their slave-owning congregants, well, many of them preached that Paul's statement should be taken to mean that the Bible supports forced slavery. And of course, their assumptions were sinful and wrong. And sadly, a whole generation of willfully sinful, along with naive and undereducated congregants, followed such teaching, as if it were the gospel, and it's not. And as a consequence, America would not become fully integrated until the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s. And even today, racial tension persists, especially in the South in the United States. But in the days of Jesus, slavery was very different. A slave in biblical terms is not necessarily a spoil of war or human cargo. In the Bible, the Lord allowed for people to sell themselves for a season, and their work earned them money and was only for a specified amount of time. Perhaps these people were overwhelmed by sudden life instances. They'd made bad business decisions or found themselves in debt, or they just didn't want the pressure of running their own household. Whatever the circumstance of their voluntary enslavement, God gave strict rules for the governance and the treatment of slaves. And there was even a nationally scheduled day called the Day of Jubilee, when slave owners were required by law to set their slaves free. Slavery was only to be for a season. Jesus proclaimed this day of freedom in his message to his hometown synagogue. Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. Jesus said, as he's reading from the Bible, "He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to set free the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." An indentured person who heard of Jesus' proclamation of Jubilee, well, they might have been tempted to cut out on their agreement with their master, thus spoiling the testimony of honesty and integrity that Christians are called to. Paul was exhorting slaves to work themselves out of slavery by fulfilling their obligations. And in the meantime, they were to rest in the knowledge that even though they were indebted to a slave owner, Jesus had actually set them free spiritually from their debt to God. So, as for free men, Paul cautioned them against becoming prideful and feeling, well, we're not slaves and we'll never be slaves. He warned them against feeling that they didn't need God. He challenged them to remember that they too had been bought with a price and are under an obligation to serve Jesus as any indentured servant would serve a master. You know, Bob Dylan once sang, "It might be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody." Jesus paid a debt that I could never afford. Therefore, I willingly serve him. I am spiritually debt-free in the Messiah, while personally and eternally indebted for his grace and mercy. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Now, Groundworks Ministries operates entirely through financial donations from faithful people just like you. And yes, we need your monthly support. Donating is secure and it's easy at our website, groundworksministries.com. You know, another way to help is to tell people about Groundworks Ministries. You can share these podcasts with friends and family, share them on your social media, and of course, you can always direct folks to our website, groundworksministries.com.